American Primeval, a new major Western streaming series, was launched by Netflix on January 9, 2025. The show is set in 1857 in the American West frontier, specifically in the somewhat lawless state of Utah. In a series of gory battles for possession of the newly discovered area, early American immigrants, cults, and indigenous tribes are depicted as murderers and survivors in the dismal, violent, chaotic, and merciless American Primeval. A few historical characters and events, with some specifics changed, served as the inspiration for the Western television series. In actuality, American Primeval and The Revenant share a lot of stylistic elements, both in terms of story and visual approaches. All 6 of American Primeval's episodes are directed by Peter Berg, who has directed shows like Friday Night Lights and Lone Survivor. Betty Gilpin, Dane DeHaan, Sora Lightfoot Leon, Shea Wiggum, Lucas Neff, and Kim Coates are among the ensemble cast members led by Taylor Kitsch. Despite not being based on a real person, Kitsch's Isaac Reed finds his purpose by the end of American Primeval. Historical fiction is what American Primeval is. Its protagonists, Sarah Rowell and Isaac Reed, are fictional characters whose stories were created specifically for the narrative and are not based on real people with the same name. Despite being a white frontiersman, Reed speaks Shoshone fluently because he was brought up as a Shoshone person. Although Reed might have existed in American history, the character was created specifically for the show. The same is true for Sarah Rowell, a strong mother who is on the run and has a $1,500 reward for killing an abusive man in Philadelphia for her own safety. Jim Bridger, Brigham Young, Winter Bird, Wild Bill Hickman, and James Woolsey are among the real-life personalities who inspired the characters in American Primeval. The dispute over who owns Fort Bridger in what is now Uintah County, Wyoming, revolves around Bridger and Young. A famed lawman, Wild Bill deserves a story of his own. James Woolsey and Winter Bird were both based on real persons. Woolsey was a man who was killed for his involvement in the Mountain Meadows Massacre, while Winter Bird was a lesbian indigenous chief. Between May 1857 and July 1858, the Utah War served as the backdrop for many of the realistic elements of American Primeval. Berg told Netflix that the director's reading of an article about the Utah War served as the impetus for the series. I came across an article about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. I began quite interested in discussing it with my wife and kids. I began researching it extensively. Mormon settlers and U.S. military forces engaged in armed combat during the Utah War. President James Buchanan's deployment of military forces to the Utah Territory after the American Primeval events unnerved Young and his Church of Latter-day Saints, who prepared for war. The Mormons barred U.S. troops from entering Salt Lake City and took steps to keep them from receiving supplies in Utah. Even unarmed immigrants were slaughtered by the terrified Mormon militia, who also claimed that some of them were American government agents. Approximately 150 persons were thought to have died during the Utah War, which ended with Brigham Young replacing Alfred Cumming as governor of Utah and the Latter-day Saints being pardoned by the president. Brigham Young is portrayed in American Primeval as an opponent who is fervently committed to evangelization through the Church of Latter-day Saints. Young is amiable and encouraging to both churchgoers and those he is attempting to persuade to his faith throughout the series. He is shown in the series as a violent person who targets anybody who acts contrary to his worldview, especially Jim Berger and American military personnel. Young is referred to as American Moses by most historians, who see him more objectively. According to PBS, he was fiery yet full of doubt, frequently ill yet strong when it mattered most. When Brigham Young and the Mormons of Utah Territory learned that President Buchanan intended to replace Young as governor, they actually set Fort Bridger on fire, as portrayed in American Primeval. By destroying Fort Bridger, the Mormons hoped to prevent the U.S. Army from entering Utah Territory. After arriving in Utah Territory in November 1857, Colonel Albert Sidney Johnston and his forces were compelled to spend the winter at the neighboring Camp Scott, which they temporarily erected. The U.S. Army moved closer to Salt Lake City in June 1858. The Army rebuilt Fort Bridger after the Mormons had left by then. The Shoshone were divided into 7 groups during the American Primeval era. The Eastern Shoshone are the group portrayed in the series. The Eastern Shoshone, numbering around 2,000 under their renowned chief Washakie, occupied the region from the Wind River Mountains to Fort Bridger and astride the Oregon Trail, the state of Utah's official website states. The Wind River Reservation is now home to their descendants. The Wind River Reservation is now home to their descendants. According to the Southern Ute, the Ute people are the oldest residents of Colorado, inhabiting the mountains and vast areas of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, eastern Nevada, northern New Mexico, and Arizona. Shoshonean is the language of the Utes. The Utes settled around the lake areas of Utah, some of which became the Paiute. Other groups spread north and east and separated into the Shoshone and Comanche people. Many people argue that although the American West was not as violent as popular culture portrays it to be, it was nevertheless rife with violent incidents because of the region's comparatively anarchic terrain. The Mountain Meadows Massacre, which actually happened, is one of the violent incidents that American Primeval condenses and intensifies. There are undoubtedly hints of the truth about violence in the harsh reality of life on the American frontier during the expansionist period of U.S. history, even though American Primeval cannot be considered a historical depiction of the savagery of the American West. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.